Good afternoon, NGLCC family. We are so thrilled that you are here with us today for yet another exciting Webinar Wednesday, a part of our continuing education program through the COVID crisis and beyond. We're so grateful to have you with us, as well as our fantastic presenter today, dear friend to the NGLCC family, especially NGLCC New York, Gerry Valentine. Thank you so much for being with us, Gerry. To everyone who's joining us for their first official Webinar Wednesday, welcome. We're so glad to have you. We are accepting Q&A throughout the conversation today, with a lot of time left over at the end of this for Gerry to take all of your questions and help you with your thriving mindset. So use our Q&A function in your Zoom window, as well as feel free to email us at webinars@nglcc.org, and we'll be able to take your questions in real time as the conversation continues. As I also extend the best wishes for my colleague and co-host for these great programs, fellow SVP Sabrina Kent, who's enjoying a well-deserved day off. So I'm happy to be here having this conversation one-on-one with Gerry and with all of you joining us over your Zooms today. To tell you about our fantastic speaker, who has been such a valued part of our community and our network. Gerry Valentine is the founder of Vision Executive Coaching, an NGLCC certified LGBT business enterprise. He's an executive coach, a keynote speaker, a business advisor with 20 years, probably won't do numbers here, but let's say several years of Fortune 100 leadership experience. He's a TEDx speaker. He's been featured in Forbes and is the author of an upcoming book, The Thriving Mindset: Tools for Empowerment, Innovation, and Leadership in a Disruptive World. He lectured on executive leadership at Columbia, Baruch College, Colorado State. Overall, he's just a pretty impressive guy, and we are very grateful to have him in the NGLCC family. Gerry, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's great to be here. And I'm looking forward, as Jonathan said, to having a very interactive session today. Please do remember to use the Q&A function so that we can try to answer your questions real time. I'm going to share my screen here, and we can get moving right away with this presentation.
Excellent.
And here we are.
All right, it is all yours, sir. Take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. As Jonathan said, my name is Gerry Valentine, and my company is Vision Executive Coaching. I am an executive coach, public speaker, and author of an upcoming book. I work with corporate executives and entrepreneurs on all types of things with leading their business, and the real focus of my coaching is thriving through disruption. So as you might imagine, this is a moment when I have been very busy speaking to my clients, speaking to my peers, and speaking to a lot of people about what's going on at this time and how to best navigate through this time. The term that I use, thriving, I have a very specific definition, and it's the definition that I'm using for my book as well. Thriving is not just about surviving whatever difficulties we're encountering. Thriving is about growing, becoming stronger, and excelling, not in spite of what we've been through, but as I speak about, is about presented with a difficult situation. How do we grow, become even stronger, and excel, not despite what we've been through, but because of what we've been through. This moment that we're going through right now with COVID-19 is extremely challenging on a number of levels, but it is also opening opportunities. And that's what I want to speak to you here about today. What I have been doing during the last several weeks is spending a lot of time talking to my clients, talking to my peers about the kinds of things they're doing and what may or may not be working. Something that I do want to point out to you is that this is an unprecedented moment, and I don't believe that anyone has all the answers. But what I do believe is that the way we're going to get through this is by coming together, by sharing what we know, and helping lift each other up. And that's part of what the Thriving Mindset is about. At a time like this, communities like NGLCC are more important than ever before, because this is how we can learn, how we can join together, and how we can lift one another up. Those of us here in the LGBTQ plus communities, along with our allies, actually tend to be very resilient people because of what we've been through. So as difficult as these moments must be, these are also our moments, because it's the time when we come forward with the full value of who we are, and it allows us to get through. So let me tell you a little bit about what I'm hearing when I talk to people. And it's important to start with the human and emotional side here, because this is a very human and emotional moment. And there's a lot of things going through people's minds. So I'm talking to a lot of business owners who are talking about running their business, but also dealing with some very specific family issues. I have one client who's running her business, but also taking care of an elderly parent with COVID. So that can be incredibly difficult. Some of us are tremendously worried about the economic situation, and what this is going to look like both professionally and personally as we navigate through it. There's another side of this, which is loneliness. A catchphrase I've started to use is that during COVID, introverts, and I tend to be an introvert myself, we're learning that we get lonely too. And the sense of isolation that's coming with COVID can be extremely difficult to navigate. And then I'm a native New Yorker, and those of us from New York and other urban hotspots of the epidemic, of course, have our own health risks to worry about, because this is very far from being over. These are the kinds of things that are going through our minds right now, and the kinds of things that are really critical to think about. And the framework that I put this all in, and that I actually use with my clients for any type of disruption, is that there's a specific cycle we can think about. Disruption is a normal part of life. Now, what we're dealing with right now is an exceptional disruption, but disruption happens all the time. And disruption typically leads to some kind of challenge, some type of adversity. And the normal response to adversity is actually a fear reaction. It's the fear that we won't be able to meet the demands of that particular adversity. And there's nothing wrong with the fear itself. The problem is when that fear turns into a type of paralysis, which is an inability to respond productively to whatever is going on around us. And paralysis always leads to more adversity. Either the initial adversity gets worse or a new adversity arises. So, COVID-19 is a massive example of the risk of this kind of adversity, fear, paralysis cycle. But let me point you to a simpler one that is actually a very business relevant. Kodak is one of my favorite examples of this cycle. So as some of you may know, Kodak is a company that, after more than a century in business, went out of business in 2012. Many of us would say that it was because of advancing technology and the advent of digital photography. But what most people don't know is that Kodak actually invented the first digital camera back in 1975. So we might ask, how could that happen? It happened because of this cycle. When presented with the disruption and adversity of a new technology, Kodak's leaders, who were men who had only known the film business, allowed their fear of change to trigger a paralysis that prevented them from leveraging their own invention. By the time they caught on, it was too late, and the competition had an insurmountable lead. So this is a very specific example, but if we think about now catapulting forward to COVID-19 and some of the tremendous types of adversity we're facing, it's easy to imagine why we might be afraid. The challenge that we all face is not allowing those fears that we're facing to turn into a paralysis and cause us to make suboptimal decisions for our business that then lead to even more adversity as we go forward. So the question is, how do we escape this cycle? The thing to remember whenever we're going through something like what we're seeing right now is that fear is actually completely natural. There's nothing wrong with it. The key is, what do we do when we're afraid? We can start to think of that fear that we feel when we're facing the kind of adversity we face right now as also a signal that we might be standing in front of an opportunity. And we can actually start to use that fear as a kind of springboard to leap out of what we're facing and into that new opportunity. And this thing I call the thriving mindset is all about dealing well with those fears that naturally come up both in business and in life in general, and learning how to use those fears as a kind of springboard out of what we're facing and into that new opportunity. And something we're going to talk about as we go forward with this session today. Interestingly, despite all the challenges that are going on around us right now, there are a number of organizations that are finding opportunity within the midst of the COVID-19 epidemic. We're going to take a look at some of the things that they're doing and start to think about how we might employ those things ourselves in our own businesses. So the first tool that I've been telling my clients about during this epidemic is that this is a time to humanize. So I am, as Jonathan said, a business person with a long history of corporate experience, and I love nothing more than to talk about technical business matters. However, there's also a time to put the technical business matters aside and start with the human aspect. And this is one of those times. Leaders of companies, leaders of organizations right now need to think people first, and as a time to humanize. It's a time when there's been what I'm calling a decompartmentalization of the work person and the work persona and the personal persona. By this point in time, we have probably all had an experience of being in a Zoom meeting with a work colleague and having the colleague's cat walk across the keyboard, or seeing children or significant others in the background as we're having a business meeting. Now, there's an interesting component of this. I literally have clients who have taken me via Zoom around their apartment and introduced me to their families and shown me their entire living quarters. And it's great because what's happened is it's led to a closer relationship. I feel now like I know them on a much deeper level than I have ever before. I have clients who are telling me that they feel like because of COVID-19, they're able to bring their full selves to work in ways that they've never been able to before. As business leaders and as business owners, one of the things we can do and we need to do right now is foster that sense of relationship, that sense of belonging. This is a time when we need to be checking in with the people we work with and the people who work for us to see how they're doing. And there are often times when leaders are afraid to check in with their people about how they're doing because they're afraid of the answer they may get back, particularly when people may not be doing well, and a lot of people are not doing very well right now. But that fear is actually part of that paralysis. And what leaders need to do is actually lean into that to make space for understanding what's going on with their people, checking in, understanding, and then if they can help, to help or to point their people in the right direction. What happens is that fosters relationships within the office and across the organization that in turn are what you're going to need as we talk about further more technical business things that you need to employ. It is a time that really centers on emotional and social intelligence. And I'm going to say a little bit more about what those concepts mean. There's a model for emotional and social intelligence that I like to use with my clients, and it's about self and others and about how you master certain skills. So first, we can think about the self. The first component of developing the type of emotional intelligence we need to deal with a situation like COVID-19 is to first think about self-awareness. To be able to take the time with ourselves and understand the emotions that we are feeling. It's just a matter of noticing. And once you're able to notice your emotions, something else happens. You're able to better manage them. And emotional intelligence is defined not as being emotional or overly emotional or only reacting to things emotionally, but reacting to your emotions in a considered manner and with purpose. So once you're aware of yourself, you can then take control of your emotions and think about how you want to come forward as a leader in your company. That allows you to tip from being purely driven by your emotions to being more adaptable and have to a positive outlook and maybe shift towards an achievement orientation. And we're going to see how when dealing with an emergency like COVID-19, shifting yourself into that achievement oriented mindset is going to be critical for how we need to go forward. The other component of emotional intelligence moves over to the social side, which is when you think about how you respond to others. When you are self-aware and managing your own emotions well, it opens up an interesting opportunity. It opens up the opportunity for you to be aware of what's going on for other people. As you become more emotionally self-aware right now, it allows you to be more empathetic for what's going on with the people that you're working with and with the people around you. And once you have that type of awareness and empathy, that allows you to better manage your relationships. And that's where you start to collaborate better and to have more teamwork. And teamwork is also going to be something fundamental for what we're discussing now. And the way that I will boil this down for clients is, if you're in a leadership position, your people are always looking to you for clues on how they ought to behave. So, and that is especially true at times of crisis. So should they behave with a sense of confidence that you will persevere and find a way to get through this? Or should they be unnerved or feeling completely unproductive or running around in circles? That all starts with the leaders. So one of the first steps in navigating through this crisis and having that thriving mindset is to look to your own emotional intelligence so that you can become that type of role model to set the right example in your organization, and such that you can actually have the empathy that you need to demonstrate for your teams going forward. Part of it is also making sure that you can show up as your best self. And the thing that I have been telling my clients is that several weeks ago, we were all catapulted into this remote work environment with no warning and with no choice. It's had an interesting impact on most people in the workplace. The people rely on a sense of structure in order to feel comfortable, in order to know what's expected of them. In this emergency, in addition to the health risks, in addition to the economic impact, something that COVID-19 has done is destroyed our sense of structure. We no longer have that routine of getting up in the morning, showering, getting dressed, perhaps taking care of the kids, going off to work, knowing exactly what's expected of us in the office, or at least to the most part, what's expected of us, then coming home to our family life. It's all pretty much up in the air. What leaders can do to help their people thrive through this emergency is to reestablish that sense of structure to a certain extent. So certainly you cannot reestablish the sense of structure for the broad array of things that are going on in your people's lives. But you can provide an oasis of structure within the work environment. So some things that some of my clients have noticed is that when their people are running around just sweating the small stuff, it increases the sense of anxiety and kind of makes the overall experience even worse. So small things like, which video platform should we use? Because that can get in the way of people working productively. So establish the baseline for that sense of structure. And then all the way up to the big things, like what is our plan for coming back to work once this is all over? A role that leaders need to play in setting up their people for success is that this is a time to over communicate. This is a time to be extremely visible as a leader. Now that we're all working at home, there can be a temptation to sit at home and kind of be that invisible person behind the computer, maybe just sending out emails, that is not what you should be doing right now. This is a time when you need to focus on remaining highly visible to your people. There is an interesting study that was done by Harvard Business School several years ago that looked at the impact of actually seeing the person on a Zoom call versus not. They divided study participants up into 3 groups, paired them off, gave them a project to work on together. The first group was only able to communicate by email. The second group was able to communicate by email, but they were also given a picture of their partner on this project. And then the third group worked on the same project, but their communication was by video chat. What they found was that the sense of engagement and the productivity of the groups goes up as you can see the person. Even having a picture versus just email improves the collaboration and the productivity of the group. And that's because when we see people, we humanize. Now, we're all spending a lot of time on Zoom, but one thing I will tell people is make yourself visible on Zoom to the extent you can. Try to set up a place in your home where you're working that is conducive to being on Zoom. Think about what's in back of you so that it's not a distraction from the work environment. And then allow your coworkers and certainly your direct reports to see you. Because when they see you, that's going to increase that sense of visibility. That's going to increase that sense of collaboration, which is going to set you up for the kinds of things that you need to do in order to be successful in this environment. The next thing that I'm advising leaders to do is to reestablish purpose. Another thing that COVID-19 has done, in addition to the health risks, in addition to the economic impact, is it's upset our sense of purpose. The future is so uncertain that we kind of feel like we're in this storm of disruption. And disruption, even if it's something like this or it's something much smaller, often feels like that storm that can cause you to lose your way and lose your sense of purpose. What leaders need to do now is to kind of be that lighthouse, that guiding light for their people that reestablishes why this company exists. What exactly is the work that you're trying to get done together? Because that sense of alignment on the work is another thing that reestablishes the structure that has been lost and allows people to come together. This is a time to lean into your corporate mission statement, whatever it may be. If you're finding that your mission statement doesn't seem relevant or people don't indeed know the mission statement, this is a time to look at what it is, because that is that sense of purpose that people need to align around as we go into this epidemic. It's also time to align to our values. There have been many stories about companies that have been extremely good actors during this epidemic, and there are many stories about companies that have not been such great actors during this epidemic. People are going to remember that. People are going to remember who was the company that really came to the forefront and acted as a value-centered leader and who did not. Living into your values within your company also helps people understand how to treat each other during this time of crisis. So how do I check in with my people? One of the things that has emerged in a lot of conversations I've been having is that people are working a tremendous number of hours right now. So many of us are getting up at 6, 7 in the morning, getting on the computer immediately, and then maybe even continuing on the computer through dinner, taking the computer to bed as we're lying down. The question becomes, is that healthy? Is that leaning into the values that the company really wants to espouse for its people? This is time to revisit those value statements and see how well you're living into those values as you align to your mission, as you're trying to lead your people through this epidemic. To move forward, a watch phrase I have told a lot of my clients is that times of crisis always reveal both the cracks and the strengths in your organization. And what I mean by that is that the things that my clients are seeing arise right now that are challenges in the around the epidemic often aren't really new challenges. I'll give you an example. I have a client who is having a tremendous problem with employee engagement. Now that people are home, people are feeling very disengaged. There's not a sense of cohesion across the organization. But if we pay more attention to that, what we realize is that that problem of employee engagement has existed in this leader's organization for a long time. It's actually dogged the organization for at least a few years now. What's happened is that the crisis has caused that crack that existed in their employee engagement to widen. On the flip side, what we notice is that times of crisis also shine a bright light on our strengths. I have another client who, over the last couple of years, has done a tremendous amount of work to improve communication across their organization, and they've had success. Now that we're going through this COVID-19 crisis, what they're finding is that the strengths they've built for their ability to communicate well across the organization are coming to the forefront. They are able to navigate better as a company in this disruptive time simply by leaning into their strength of communication. What leaders need to do is to be aware of what were the cracks in your organization in the past and what have the strengths been in the organization. This is a time that's going to highlight the cracks and highlight the strengths. Part of your job as a leader is to make sure that you shore up whatever those cracks are so that they don't widen into canyons. And the tool that you can use to shore up those cracks is by leaning into your strengths. So we all have cracks and strengths in our organization. Focus on them. I believe I see on the screen, I'll ask you, Jonathan, that a few questions have come up. Is that indeed true? Because maybe I'll take a pause and try to answer those questions if indeed they have come up.
Actually, Gerry, you beat me to it. This is exactly the moment I was going to chime in and remind everyone that we're at the halfway mark. We've had a lot of new folks join us since the conversation began. Welcome to everyone who's here for NGLCC Webinar Wednesdays. We're thrilled to have you. We're in the middle of a great conversation about the thriving mindset with Gerry Valentine, certified LGBTBE owner and a great leader in our community. Those of you who have questions, feel free to use the Q&A button. Right now, we've had a few that we've answered and sent links to directly to the questioner. But if you have anything you'd like to share with the group or with Gerry, please use the Q&A button. We'd love to hear from you. We'll have ample time at the end of the conversation for that as we press ahead. Gerry, once again, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so enlightening, and we're excited to hear what you have left.
Okay, great. Let us move on. I just wanted to make sure that we're answering whatever we needed to. Let me just try to go back. Great. So to jump back in, there is a model that I have been suggesting to clients for thinking about, for how to think about what was going through right now. And I rely on eagles and what eagles do when a storm is approaching. And many people don't know this. Eagles have the ability to sense when a storm is approaching. And what they do is they leave their perch and they fly to a higher altitude and they pitch their wings such that they can catch the winds of the storm and use those winds of the storm to lift them to a higher altitude. And the eagle doesn't actually avoid the storm, but the eagle uses the storm to fly to a higher altitude. And I think that's one of the ways that we need to look at these disruptive winds or this disruptive storm that's coming towards us. How do we use what's going on around us to soar above the storm and not be overcome by the storm? And I'm thinking about it as, or telling my clients to think about it as a way to move to the next normal. There's some talk about when are things going to get back to normal. I personally don't believe things are going to get back to normal. I think what's going to happen is that we're going to have to navigate to the next normal. It's going to look a little bit different than it did in the past. And the people who are able to use the types of tools I've been speaking about to navigate to that next normal are going to be the ones who are most successful at thriving. So let's talk a little bit about some of those examples. There's an interesting company in New York City. It's called Feldman's Hot Dogs. Now, they were launched in 1867. They actually preceded Nathan's Hot Dogs. They were the first hot dogs offered on the Coney Island Boardwalk. Feldman was a German immigrant. He had a proprietary recipe for his hot dogs and did quite well for quite a period of time, until one of his employees actually moved down the street, opened Nathan's Hot Dogs, and sold them for a nickel less. The competition went on until Feldman's was shuttered in 1954. However, three brothers revived the brand, reopened it in 2011. They've now marketed Feldman's Hot Dogs as a higher end brand. They have a stand out in Brooklyn, but they also have stands in various neighborhoods throughout Manhattan. Something interesting has happened to them in COVID-19. In the last couple of months, they've seen a 200% increase in sales. And there's an interesting reason. They were actually written up in the New York Times this past Sunday, which is where I saw the story and noted it and pulled it for this presentation. In January, when the news started to break about COVID-19, one of the brothers actually realized just how big a deal this was going to be and how serious a health threat it might be. He first thought about it as potentially disrupting their supply chain. And we've now seen that as the epidemic has progressed into meat packing plants, he was indeed right. So the first thing he did was he purchased more inventory. In their case, it's beef and pork, and they froze it. So they were able to stock up on the inventory. The next thing they started to do was to promote their product as something that was easily frozen. That's why they've seen the growth. They also started promoting the kid-friendly nature of their product. So now what's happened is in the New York City area, we have lots of families that have stocked up on Feldman's hot dogs, and this small non-tech business has managed to find a way to sail above the storm of this disruption and actually grow their business at this time. And the reason I like the story is it's kind of perfectly analogous to the eagle story that I just told you. The brother sensed the storm coming. He pitched his wings, which is this business, in a way that he could catch the winds of this type of disruption. He stocked up on his inventory and is now using the storm of COVID-19 to sail above what was going on. But Feldman's isn't the only company where this is going on. And the key here in answering this type of disruption and thinking about pivoting to what that next normal is to think about how we build whole cultures of that type of innovation within our company. So let me give you a few more examples. We spoke about the Feldman's hot dog situation. Something that there's a lot of talk in the business community about right now is the virtual work environment. It's quite clear that there's going to be a lot more virtual work in the future. Virtual work actually started out, if you look at the history of it, as a, quote, accommodation for working parents. And typically it was working moms as a way that companies could accommodate their needs and have them still in the workforce. It had progressed a bit, but I know from my practice, there are many areas of holdouts of people who believe that companies could not possibly be successful by working in a remote environment. COVID-19 has shown us that remote work can absolutely work. And there are many companies, some of them are clients of mine, who are reconsidering what their footprint needs to look like. And they're now thinking that parts of virtual work may be permanent. There was a recent quote by Zuckerberg talking about how within 10 years he sees the possibility that as much as 40% of Facebook's employees could be remote workers. That is a massive change for Facebook because their corporate philosophy in the past has been to keep people in the office, and it's a culture that's actually frowned on remote work. So we're seeing that there's an innovation opportunity here. Who are the people out there and running companies out there that can take advantage of this virtual work wind and rise above the storm that we're experiencing? You know, an easy example to think about is we're all on Zoom right now. Had any of us thought to buy Zoom stock in December, we would probably be very much sailing upon this storm of disruption that we have. It turns out that it was just Zoom's moment, because this particular storm that has come at us is ideally suited for the challenges that Zoom solves. Another thing that has taken off tremendously during this time is telemedicine. I have been working with my doctor, who's at NYU Langone, through an amazing app they have that lets me literally do a doctor's visit on my smartphone. They had the app before. It's obvious to me that during this epidemic, they've really beefed up the app. I'm seeing new buttons arise all the time. So I can actually do far more things with my doctor on my phone now than I ever could before. This boom in telemedicine is obviously not going to go away once we come past this epidemic. It's going to materially change how we practice medicine. Who are the companies out there that can ride this wave of the boom in telemedicine? I'll tell you another story about a company. I have a friend who runs a physical therapy practice here in New York City, and it's a sizable practice. It's one with on the order of, he's got like 25, 30 physical therapists working in his office. It's a fairly large floor through office in Lower Manhattan. When this epidemic started, he was tremendously concerned about health risks for his staff and health risks for his patients. And he actually shut down his practice before the stay-at-home order. But he did something really interesting. So that he could keep touch with some of his patients, he set up a video teletherapy practice. And for those of you who may have been in physical therapy at one time or another, you'll know that some of physical therapy is manual manipulation, where the therapist is actually touching the patient or perhaps using some kind of equipment, and that cannot be done in a virtual setting. But much of physical therapy, and in some cases most of physical therapy, is actually exercise, made up of exercises that the therapist gives the patient and guides the patient through. That can be done in a virtual Zoom session. So he started launching these virtual physical therapy sessions as a way to try to keep at least some money coming into the business and to keep at least some of his staff minimally employed. What he found was that the availability of virtual physical therapy has actually expanded the footprint of his practice, because it's eliminated geographical proximity as a barrier to getting to his practice. He's noticing now that he has patients from areas that he did not have them before. He will be reopening I got an email from him recently. He will be reopening his practice, I think, within the next 3 weeks, but he's going to continue with the virtual physical therapy, because out of COVID-19, he has found an incremental area of business that he can continue as we go through and eventually solve this emergency. There's another company called Starship Technologies, which is in Fairfax, Virginia. They have been piloting quite some time with an AI-enabled type of delivery robot. It's about the size of a cooler. It looks a lot like a plastic cooler with big wheels and an antenna on it. And it's a robot that you can actually use to deliver takeout. During this COVID-19 emergency, Starship Technologies has partnered with both the city and with a number of takeout restaurants in the local area to deliver takeout to quarantined COVID patients via these robots. And when you think about it, it's a great idea. So there's no human-to-human contact. These are plastic containers that are relatively small, so they're easily sanitized when they return. It's AI technology that augments some remote control technology. So these are things that are zipping up and down the city sidewalks going to specific addresses. So it's an easy way to get takeout out. And then if you fast forward to a time when we're past this health emergency, it seems fairly obvious that there's an opportunity for these types of robots to continue in some form once we're past it. So it's a whole new business model that seems to be taking hold and getting a footing because of this emergency. Now, cultures of innovation, it's kind of the holy grail of business in a lot of ways. For years and years and years, I've seen companies run around and talk about, we want to be more innovative. We definitely want to get our people more innovative. And it's a skill that I think a lot of companies struggle to develop. And there are a few things that I think are necessary for that skill of building a culture of innovation. And these are the ones. So the first one is a sense of trust. And people consider that a really odd place to start for innovation, but I think it's the most important place to start. In order to have an innovative culture, I have to, if I want to bring a new idea forward, I have to have a sense of trust that if my idea does not pan out, I'm not going to be ridiculed, I'm not going to be fired, that my boss is not going to think less of me for having come forward and tried to bring a new idea for the company. It is amazing how many companies lack just that fundamental level of trust that would allow employees to come forward with new ideas. Sometimes when I go into a new client and they tell me, we really have got to get some innovation going here. What are the things you can tell us? The first question I will ask them is, how does your company deal with failure? And there are a shocking number of situations where leaders of the company will tell me, we don't tolerate failure. That's not part of our culture. We don't want people failing. And with that statement, I know exactly why they have no innovation. Because if you do not tolerate failure, you cannot possibly have innovation. And if you've instructed your employees, I'm rewarding you on success, not for innovative ideas, but on a 100% success rate, then people aren't going to take chances. At a time like this, when people are facing tremendous personal challenges, there's a risk there, but there's a golden opportunity. If you can use some of the humanizing skills we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation to increase that level of trust from your employees, to demonstrate visibly to your employees that you actually care about them, especially at this time, then you open up the opportunity for them to also trust you by being willing to come to you with innovative ideas. What we're starting to see is that the companies that have the more open environments are the ones who are able to innovate more effectively in these environments. The second thing that I tell companies when they're thinking about how do they innovate in particularly in these types of environments, is to focus on building intelligent experimentation. So intelligent experimentation is about, I have an idea, it may or may not be the right idea, it may or may not work, but I figured out a way that my company can test the idea without incurring significant risk, but get the learning. And I'm able to go to my boss with idea of how this experiment would work and get his or her support. Or if I can't get his or her support, they'll at least help me refine the experiment such that it really does become intelligent. Once the experiment is run, what the boss has to do is to think about learning from the experiment. It's not necessarily whether it's a 100% success rate, but it's whether we learned from that experiment. And that takes me to the third thing that's critical for a culture of innovation, is to celebrate both success and to celebrate failure, as long as it was an intelligent failure from an intelligent experiment. How many companies are willing to have a staff meeting where you will talk about a particular employee's project that was well designed, they had a really intelligent experiment that was able to yield the learnings they wanted. The experiment was a failure. It showed that the company should never try that again. And you celebrate that employee for bringing forward the learning that this is an idea that we really shouldn't pursue, by really rigorously testing it and understanding it. How many of you can actually say that you're able to celebrate that type of learning? The key behind all of this is that people do what we pay them to do. And if you pay people if you pay people and reward them for not taking chances, for having a 100% success rate, you will drive all the innovation out of your company. If you do that, you're not well suited for this type of an emergency, because what we need is that more innovative type of thinking to build that culture of innovation. So to move forward a little bit, as we're coming kind of close to the end of our time, the thriving mindset to deal with this type of disruption or any other disruption that we may face in a business is really about training people and training ourselves to take that courageous leap into that next normal, and whatever that next normal may be. So the first step that we spoke about was humanizing. We're going through a really difficult time. Take the courageous leap of checking in with your people, noticing who's struggling, and then offering the support, whatever that support may look like, in whatever form you can offer it. When you do that, you're going to build the level of trust that you're going to need to get through this. As a leader, this demands enormous emotional and social intelligence on your part. We're all human. We're all feeling it. We're all dealing with uncertainty. However, the people who work for you are relying on you to be that steadying influence for them. In order to be that steadying influence, we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to see to our own emotional and social intelligence, which is about being aware of what we're feeling, managing what we're feeling, and then coming forward in the most productive way. We have to lean into our mission and values. A thing that the epidemic has done, in addition to everything else, is kind of kick the ladder out from under us. Many people feel like they're in free fall, that they don't know what's important. They don't know what they need to do right now. As leaders, if we can lean into that mission and values that we've established for our companies, visibly remind people of why we're all here, what important work we're trying to get done, and their role in that work. And then if the work doesn't seem important anymore, then maybe this is a time to relook at your mission and think about what you're trying to get done. And I have a lot of people who come to me when they feel like they may have lost their footing in their mission, and there's some exercises I use to help them go through and think about what their mission really ought to be. That mission and values, combined with your emotional intelligence as a leader, becomes that beacon that helps your people navigate their way through the storm of this disruption that we're going through. Think about the cracks and strengths in your organization. Times of disruption always highlight both cracks and strengths in the organization. As a leader, it is your job to shore up those cracks, to make sure they don't widen into canyons, and to lean into your strengths such that you can actually shore up those cracks and make positive progress. And then finally, the key is making that courageous leap into the next normal and thinking about where are the opportunities to innovate such that you can get to that next normal. Think about those intelligent experiments and establishing the level of trust in your people so that they're willing to come to you with new ideas such that you can build those cultures of innovation. And with that, we believe we're coming, Jonathan, near to the end of our time. And so I will give you everybody my contact information here, and we can open up the floor to any questions that people may have. Jonathan, you're muted.
I was just
There you
making
go.
sure that you were paying attention. Thank you, Sarah. Great presentation. As always, it's always a wonderful treat to get to watch you inspire others. Thank you, Gerry. We've got several great questions that have come in, several by email actually that I want to share, and want to encourage everyone in these final few moments to take advantage of that Q&A button on your screen. We'd love to hear your questions. This is a really neat one from someone who said, I didn't want to use the chat window just in case everyone saw, because I didn't want to be the person with the silly question. Well, this is definitely not a silly question.
These are no silly questions.
And basically they're saying, you spoke so eloquently about authentically connecting with your staff. We're all scared. We're all going through something right now. What about we as LGBTQ people who oftentimes may not have kids of our own, or have a very non-typical family life of our own making? How do we have conversations with our staff who are really worried about kids and their families in a way that is empathetic and authentic?
Okay, can I just stop and say, you thought this was a silly question?
I know,
This is
right?
like one of the best. Oh my God, this is one of the best questions I've ever heard. Whoever sent this, thank you so much for that question. There are several answers to that, and this question is really resonating to me because I don't have kids. It was never an objective of mine to be a parent. My husband and I, we are, and it's just the two of us, and that's it. I have a very dear friend who, also a gay man, who has 3 kids. And we have actually been working together a lot during this crisis. He's in a very similar business, and we are mentors for each other. We're thought partners for each other. And when I am on Zoom with him, every single time there is at least one kid that goes past the screen. I know his kids, and we say hi and all that. And it's been an interesting expansion for my life, because I get to understand the world from someone else's point of view. His concerns, we share some concerns, but he has some other concerns that are not part of my life. The showing up authentically, I think, is as much about genuine curiosity and interest as anything else. So if you are someone in the LGBTQ community or outside of the LGBTQ community who does not have children, and you're interfacing with someone, a coworker or a subordinate who has children, start by taking an interest in what's going on for them. Like, what are the concerns? And it's interesting, he is not the only one. I have clients. I have a client actually which I did not know this before this epidemic, who has a kid that has special needs, a kid who is on the spectrum. And for this kid to say, you know what, daddy's on a Zoom call right now, can you please be quiet for 15 minutes? That is an unrealistic ask. And so what he has had to do, and the thing that we have actually worked on, is what are strategies to deal with that? I don't have kids, and I have no idea what that would be like. But the value, which I think, and the real connection, the real authentic connection, is when you can see the world from somebody else's point of view, and perhaps someone who has a very different experience than you, and then start to meet them where they are. So I would say the first question, ask them, how are you doing?
Yeah.
How are you doing with the kids at this time? What is that like for you? I don't have kids, so I don't know, but I'd really like to know, how are you doing? And is there anything I can do to help? Start there.
It's great advice. I'll tell you, we had folks, anyone who joined us for our Sip and Pitch Fridays, there was one of the reasons that exists is because of the direct ask, the feedback from the community saying, we just want to be together in some way and talk about real things, talk about what we're making, talk about what we're feeling, talk about what our kids are doing,
exactly,
and whatever else it might be. Because as our corporate partners always tell us, the reason they love matchmakers so much, for example, is they do business with people. They don't do business with your employee ID number. So,
exactly.
So this is a great time to be reconnecting and humanizing with people. And that leads us to a great question in the Q&A box. What are resources other than Zoom and some social media platforms that you recommend to set up a virtual environment for your business? And I'll take this point of privilege to say there's great resources besides what Gerry can tell us, simply by looking through the my.nglcc.org database of LGBT suppliers who work in the virtual meeting and connecting space. We were putting several of those out into the field with many of our corporate partners and even fellow suppliers and business owners who need to do really powerful and well-honed one-on-one conversations with them and their customers and their marketplace. But on this personal level, what's a great way to set up a virtual environment that you recommend, Gerry?
So first off, I wouldn't exactly recommend what you just said, Jonathan. Go to the database of suppliers and see. I'm actually going to take that question in a different direction, and because I'm hearing maybe a question under the question. One of the things that's happening, and one of the reasons that people are not always finding Zoom as productive as they would hope, is that there's this phenomenon called Zoom fatigue.
Sure.
And it is real. It is absolutely real. And there's a reason that's happening. So in the legacy work environment, we would, even if we had a day that was back-to-back meetings, you still had to get up from your desk, go down the hall to whoever's office, or go to a conference room, or go to a different conference room, or say goodbye to someone who was in your office and escort the other person in. Those were mini breaks in your day, right? Now, at the push of a button, you go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And some of us are doing that like from 7 to 7 or 7 to 9 every single day. And it's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. So I'm actually handling that question by telling some of my clients to go the other way. Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone. The phone still works. The phone still works. And although I have said, have the visual when you can, when you're getting fatigued, pick up the phone. Some of my friends that I'm trying to stay in touch with during this time, I'm making the point of asking them, so would you rather Zoom or do you want me to just call you?
Yeah.
Like, are you just really tired of being on Zoom? So to round out that question, totally agree with what you said, Jonathan. Go to the database. There's some fantastic companies in the NGLCC community that are doing some really interesting things there. And go the other direction. Telephone still works. And sometimes the reason Zoom isn't as engaging as we would like it to be is because you are tired.
Mm-hmm.
And you just need to take a break and maybe just do a phone call.
And I'll tell you too, another great best practice that came up on a call we had last week on that very subject was we are all so eager for anything and everything that is new and novel in a moment, because we are so rarely able to leave our homes and our offices to go do anything new. This is a great time for the handwritten note. If you are trying to,
I totally agree with that.
Great time to reach out to old clients, new clients with something tactile, because we're not getting that much mail these days.
Yep, exactly. If I can extend on that, Jonathan, it's actually a great time to reach out in general. I did not mention that during today's presentation, but I talked at length about this in a webinar I did last night. I know people who are in job transition right now, and I had one client ask me, how, like, now I'm stuck at home, how do I make those connections? Actually, it's the perfect time to make those connections. It's the time to call old contacts you may have not spoken to a while and say, how are you? Yeah. How are you? How are you doing? It is this time for that old-fashioned either handwritten note or old-fashioned phone call to someone that you have not spoken to a while and just say, how are you?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And certainly, I think we are all well and better from this conversation. We really appreciate your time today, Gerry. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, a great chance to remind you that we always do a recap on the NGLCC blog, and we'll include links and contact information so you can work with Gerry to improve and innovate your company during this time. Thank you, as always, for joining us Webinar Wednesdays. Next week, we have a conversation called Business Unusual, Growing Your your company when business unusual becomes business as usual. And that's certainly the next many months of our lives. So a great conversation we had with change leaders Heather Cox and Liz Whitehead. And this Friday is the next return of Sip and Pitch Fridays. From 3 to 5 p.m., see some outstanding LGBT-owned companies pitch their business, get great feedback on how to grow, how to pivot, how to market from corporate experts. And as Gerry mentioned, we learn sometimes so much more by taking a risk and maybe falling down than running through the finish line. And so much can be gained from learning from our peers. So come watch some great pitches, hear some great feedback. It might just be exactly what your business needs. And then from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we'll be having community and conversation. Pour a drink, put your feet up, tell a joke, bring a story. Let's talk about how we're feeling and how we're helping others. We'll have some great conversation starters from NGLCC leadership and members of the community, and best of all, you there. So once again, our thanks to Gerry and to all of you for spending your Wednesday with us for Webinar Wednesdays. We look forward to having you next week and throughout the entire summer together. And as always, we are here for you. Reach out to us for anything we can do, either at webinars or education at nglcc.org. And until we see you all at Sip and Pitch Fridays, have a great, safe week. Thank you.
So long, everyone.